there's always a moment of truth where I say, look, it's either put up or shut up. And it was time to put up. I had crossed that thin line. It was 100 plus degrees. We were hot. We were on fire. We were yelling our hearts out. You could feel the intensity rising. Even in our tiredness, even in our weakness, even in our pain, we continued to push. I told myself, you can suck up the pain for another mile and a half, and you will be a Marine. Not many people believe that I could do it. I don't know where I got the energy from. I don't know where the pain went to. But all I know is that I had what it took. I am a United States Marine.
PFC Darrell Willis serves his country as a Marine. Will you? Visit Marines.com or call 1-800-MARINES. The few, the proud, the Marines.
In these uncertain economic times, you've got to do whatever you can to save money. One of our biggest expenses can be our cars, especially when unexpected repair bills hit. Not anymore. If you own a vehicle with less than 130,000 miles, is less than 12 years old, has a warranty about to expire, or even no warranty at all, you could stop paying for car repairs. Roadside assistance, towing, and rental coverage are all included. Don't wait for the next repair. Make one free call right now to see if you qualify. If your vehicle is less than 12 years old, has less than 130,000 miles, even if it's out of warranty, paying for car repairs can become a thing of the past. Call us right now and get your car protected before your next repair bill hits. Get protection and no more repair bills. Call 800-696-1030. Again, 800-696-1030. That's 800-696-1030. 800-696-1030.
Individuals and businesses with tax problems, listen carefully. Do you feel like you're losing control over your finances? If you owe over $10,000 in back taxes or have unfiled tax returns, we can help you take back control. The IRS is the largest and most aggressive collection agency in the world, and they can seize your bank account, garnish your paycheck, close your business, and file criminal charges. Take control of your tax problems now by calling the experts at Tax Mediation Services and take advantage of the Fresh Start program and new laws that may allow us to negotiate a settlement for the lowest amount possible. Our team of tax attorneys and enrolled agents can stop collections and get you protected so you can take control of your financial future. Tax Mediation Services is accredited by the Better Business Bureau. Call now for a free case review and a price protection guaranteed quote.
Call Tax Mediation Services now at 800-610-9050. That's 800-610-9050. 800-610-9050.
All writers are prone to becoming so attached to our characters and stories that we struggle to see why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing to full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, shaping stories into masterpieces that can stand the test of time. Editing services are provided for all genres and all age categories. Services range from critiques of the short story through to the line edits of the full-length novel and copy editing for those preparing for publication. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites, as well as help with those book blurbs and promotional material. We won't abandon you to the masses. We want to celebrate with you in your successes. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services and prices, visit us at blackwolfeditorial.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Sometimes we need to slow down and remember the simple pleasures in life. Good coffee, good books, and good company. Come on in. Take a seat. The coffee's just been brewed. Let's see who we have in the coffee shop today. Let's see who we have in the coffee shop today. There's author Paul Shin. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Like I said, I'm more than happy to have you. So how long did it take you to write your book?
It actually took me more than 10 years, and that's partly because I was working a full-time job at the same time that I was writing this. And quite honestly, it's because also I ran out of steam a couple times along the way.
But you still persevered and pushed through and made sure that you got it done. What inspired you to pick it back up and keep going?
Yeah, it was... I think the main motivation was because I felt that it was a story that nobody else could tell. So I felt a kind of sense of obligation to make sure that I finished this, to make sure that the story got out there. And I think that was partly what motivated me to keep on going through those kind of lean moments.
Why do you feel that no one else could tell this story?
So the story is ostensibly about North Korea, but it actually takes place in New York City and along the East Coast. And it also takes place partly in North Korea and partly in England and partly in Europe. And because of my own personal history, I lived in England when I was young, and I lived in Korea, and now I'm in New York City. I felt like I had a unique perspective into all those three locations. So I wanted to get at some real deep emotional truth about what it must be like for a North Korean who's living outside of North Korea. So I felt that nobody else could really tackle that topic as I could.
Now, when you say you lived in Korea, I'm going to assume you lived in South Korea, unless you or your family defected, which would be huge.
No, I'm South Korean.
Okay.
As are probably 99.99% of all Koreans in the U.S.
That's what I said, I was kind of assuming as much, but I was just double checking. So, how were you able to do... I have a feeling doing research on North Korea was a bit challenging. I mean, it is the hermit kingdom.
It is, yeah. It is quite challenging. That's also partly why it took so long, because I was using primarily news reports and my own research. And if you really pay attention, there are trickles of news that come out of North Korea every now and again. And they don't tend to be the wacky misbehavings of North Korean leaders types of stories. There are actually very concrete pieces of information that are trickling out all the time in open sources. And that was actually one of the things that inspired me to write this story. The genesis of the story was back in 1997 when North Korea was going through this devastating famine. The North Korean mission to the United Nations, they had so little money that when their ambassador got really sick and he had to go to a local hospital in New York City, the mission had no money to pay his hospital bills. And this is not the kind of thing that North Korea, I mean, it's quite kind of a PR disaster for them to have this poverty exposed to the world like that. So when news about that got out, which was reported in a local newspaper, the local Korean American community sort of rallied around the cause and they started raising money to pay his hospital bills, even though he's North Korean. And most of the immigrants in New York are South Korean. So that really caught my attention. I kind of set that aside, put it in a drawer, and that was kind of the genesis of Half-Life.
One, that would be a PR nightmare for the propaganda machine of North Korea. Two, what an amazing story for, just human story from the South Korean American community. That's incredible. They rallied around him and paid his hospital bills. Wow.
Right. That's one of the paradoxes of the tension between North and South Korea, because you hear about the tension all the time. You hear about military exercises. You hear about this conflict whenever North Korea fires a test missile. You hear about all the tension. But fundamentally, North Koreans and South Koreans still feel that they are one people. And in principle, that they want to reunify. So there's not a feeling that that North Koreans are the other. South Koreans feel that they are the same people. So I think that was partly what inspired the South Koreans to want to help him.
I actually just, on my main show, Jesse's POV, actually just read an article that there are South Koreans that want to see their, families were divided by the war, and the South Koreans want to see their North Korean relatives before they die, because they're getting so old now, and all the struggles to do that.
That's right. It's been over 60 years now since the Korean War was reached an armistice, and so that generation who was alive then, most of them are sort of on that cusp of dying out. So it's really kind of now or never. It has to happen soon, or that entire generation of families who are actually physically split during the war, they will basically all die out.
Like I said, that's just amazing. And as I remind my listeners to my regular show, Jesse's POV, there was technically North and South Korea are still at war. It was essentially an armistice is essentially a ceasefire. It was not a peace treaty.
Yep.
I've actually been...
The war was never declared ended. They just signed an armistice, which means that the two wars are technically still at war.
I have actually personally been to the DMZ. So I spent about 2.5 weeks in South Korea, which I know is no time at all, but I did get to visit.
The DMZ is a surreal experience, isn't it?
Very interesting. I mean, I was on a USO tour there, and they had the loudspeakers were going that day.
Right.
And so tensions were a little bit on the high side, so it was interesting. And I took some photos of the North Koreans standing on the big building on their side, and when I got home, I magnified them and zoomed in, and the uniforms looked Soviet era.
Yeah, exactly. When I was in college in Korea, they no longer have this, but when I was a freshman or a sophomore, they had mandatory week-long sort of a military boot camp style training that was required of all college students. And part of that was a visit to the DMZ. And the unit that we visited happened to be towards the Eastern Front, which is pretty mountainous. And those guys are some tough hombres. And when we stood guard duty for one shift overnight, and it was a surreal experience.
What happened to make it a surreal experience in your mind, or was it just the fact that you're kilometers away from the border or wherever you were stationed?
Well, you get to realize on a visceral level that there is this tension that is present 24/7, and you may live, or I may live. At the time, I may have been a college student going to college in Seoul, living sort of a carefree college student's life. But then you're thrown into this environment where you realize that these guys have their life on the line every night. And, you're up in the guard tower and they have claymores at the ready, they have machine guns at the ready, they have rocket launchers at the ready. And, if they catch you catching some Z's, they will really chew you out, even though we were college students. And those guys who were standing guard duty, of course, that was unacceptable.
Wow. I mean, I was on a USO tour. We, of course, were mostly interacting with the American soldiers that were on the DMZ, and their motto was in front of them all. And it was just so fascinating. We actually went to the Military Armistice Commission building and, of course, walked over the line, technically into North Korean territory, but, of course, we're safe inside the building.
Right. Only when the door is closed on the other side, though.
Yes, the door was closed and there was a ROK soldier standing right in front of that soldier.
Right. And you're not allowed to stand behind him.
No. Oh, he was, you couldn't get between him and that door.
Right, exactly.
Physically impossible. It's it was a fascinating experience. So it's one I wish everyone could have. Of course, not everyone will go, but I've always had a fascination with closed countries and closed cultures. And while I have crossed both Iran and North Korea off my countries to visit list, because with a U.S. passport it would not be advisable.
Mm-hmm.
But it is eventually one of those days I'd love to do it.
Yeah. In fact, that's sort of one of the central themes of Half-Life is if you're a member of the elite in North Korea, you're forced to live a double life because on the one hand, you're aware of what the outside world is like, and especially if, like the main character in my book, a guy named Han Chol-soo, he's a diplomat in New York City, he knows exactly what's going on in the outside world. And at the same time, this is based in 1997, you have this massive famine going on in his home country. And so he has to live this double life. And so that's sort of at the core of what this story is about.
What do you mean by living a double life? He obviously has to, I'm sure, espouse the party line and say how wonderful everything is in North Korea, but...
Right. So exactly, he has to do that, but because of his exposure to the Western world, that willingness to espouse the party line, the propaganda, it begins to chip away at him, and his life begins to unravel.
That is fascinating. I definitely want to take time and read your whole book. I did skim through parts of it, but a quick skim is nothing compared to reading the entire book.
So the main plot point is that he's in New York City with his wife and newborn son, and his wife runs away with their son. And this is a catastrophe for him because if his bosses find out, then it means that he'll be sent to a labor camp. His whole family back in North Korea could be sent to a labor camp. So he goes on this chase around the U.S. to try and find his wife and son before his bosses find out. And that is sort of the driving force in terms of the plot.
Okay, that's fascinating. And correct me if I'm wrong, but because the U.S. has no diplomatic relations with North Korea, technically North Korean diplomats to the UN are given a special visa that allows them like 25 miles around the UN. So he had to break all the rules to go get his wife and son back before word got back to his bosses that she had essentially run away.
That's right. So in real life, North Korean diplomats are not allowed to leave beyond a certain radius of New York City, and because of this incident, he is forced to violate that and go chasing after her.
I'm sitting here going, wow, does that one thought that he's not allowed to go beyond a certain boundary stop him or cause him any grief or anything of the sort?
Yeah, I mean, he sort of has a nervous fit when he realizes that he's crossing that boundary. But the consequences of not doing so and not finding his wife and son, the consequences are so dire that he has to do it.
Like I said, it sounds like a fascinating read. Oh, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to add that because he has to go on this kind of road trip, that it's also an opportunity to see the U.S. through this person's eyes, and that's a sort of another layer of the novel.
I think, like I said, I think the premise, and I think you're right. I think you're one of the few people that could tell this story with any level of accuracy, because I got a glimpse of life in Korea, and I've got some, cute photos of kimchi donuts and got to go to some local restaurants, and I had my own personal run-in with soju. Nobody escapes
Korea without a run-in with soju.
Yes, and it was my first night in the country. I'd just flown from the U.S. into Korea and gotten myself to Suwon Air Base, which was where my husband was stationed.
Uh-huh.
And there's a special system that military and family members have to be enrolled in. Got myself enrolled in that. My husband got off work. And then he takes me across the street to this little bar that had like fried chicken, and we myself, my husband, and one of his buddies split a pitcher of soju with like some fruit juice or something in it, or something sweet in it.
The dangerous kind.
I bet. And of course, I'm exhausted from traveling. I don't drink much anyway. And then, of course, I don't know if you've ever been to, for those who've never been to Suwon Air Base, it's from the entrance to the base back to where my husband's room was, it's about a quarter of a mile walk down through a tunnel, down through a set of stairs, through a tunnel, across the tunnel, and back up this set of stairs. Well, okay, let's be blunt here, I was drunk, and the soju hit me hard right on those stairs.
So you had the dangerous kind because that flavored soju, you don't realize how strong it is, and so you start chugging it, and before you know it, you're completely drunk.
I had maybe 3 or 4 little glasses, but you're talking to someone who doesn't normally drink much alcohol.
Right. Any people out there who want to try soju, it kind of tastes like vodka straight up, so I would recommend the straight up way first, just to know what you're getting into.
Most definitely, because that sweet stuff was definitely dangerous, as you so aptly described it.
It is deceptive.
You spent 10 years writing this book off and on. And then when you finally got it done, did you get it beta read? Did you have an editor look at it? What did you do?
So I was fortunate in that because in my day job I was a reporter / editor, I have a lot of writer friends, and they may be in the news business, but they're also avid readers. So I had a handful of people that I could give the manuscript to, and I trusted their opinion, so I had them read it first. And they gave me some feedback, and I took in some of that feedback. Sometimes you have to ignore some feedback because you feel strongly about something, but oftentimes when you get feedback, you have to be open to it because people are seeing things that you haven't seen because you've been so close to the work for so long that you have blind spots. So I sent it to a number of friends, maybe about 3 or 4 friends that I trusted their opinion on. And they gave me some feedback. I incorporated some of that. And then I started looking for an agent, a literary agent. And I got a couple of rejections, but then I knew somebody personally who was an agent, and I asked him to take a look at it as sort of a personal favor. And much to my surprise, he decided to take me on as a client.
Okay, and would you care to share your agent's name or not really? It's entirely up to you.
His name is Mark Gottlieb. He works for a company called Trident Media, based in New York City, as a lot of publishing, the whole publishing industry is kind of New York-centric. So I had that advantage. When I went to a recent writers' conference in Nashville, Killer Nashville, which was a fantastic conference, I realized how lucky I was because there were a bunch of writers there who were looking for an agent. And in my case, I just was really lucky in that I was in a place where I was exposed to a lot of people in the business. So I felt, after I came back from that conference, the overwhelming feeling was that how fortunate I was.
Was that your first ever writers' conference?
It was, in terms of a fiction writers' conference. I've been to journalism conferences before, but yes, that was my first fiction writers' conference.
So I have a feeling that was a very interesting and enlightening experience for you.
It was. I kind of got a new appreciation for the publishing industry, how much it's changing, things that I had never really thought about before. I was really focused on the craft of writing, but it really opened my eyes to the business side of writing.
What was your biggest challenge when writing this book? I mean, were there personal struggles with, your Korean heritage versus where you live now? Was it lack of time? What was your biggest personal challenge?
Yeah, it was primarily a lack of time, and more than a lack of time, well, in addition to a lack of time, I think the biggest challenge for somebody who has a day job, who's working on something like this, is trying to enforce some structure into your life where you can give yourself a chunk of time each day where you can work on your novel, or if it's nonfiction, then nonfiction. Because you do have to balance your day job and your passion of writing. But you really can't rely on inspiration to strike you to start writing. It's really hard to maintain momentum when you do that. So for me, in my case, I just set aside an hour or so every day in the morning before I went to work, hour and a half, where I just sat down and I just wrote. And once I started picking up some momentum, that was really when I felt that I was making some headway into finishing this.
Okay, so so your biggest challenge actually was just time. And that's what I hear from a lot of writers is, I've got my day job, then I've got my passion of writing, and trying to find that balance between family and day job and everything else.
It really is sort of the ultimate challenge if you have a day job. And in my case, because my day job involves writing as well, I found that if I tried to write after I got home from work, my brain was pretty much mush. I couldn't really. It was like the writing equivalent of digging ditches all day long and then coming home and then trying to dig another ditch. You're just exhausted. Your brain is exhausted. So in some ways, I almost felt like I wish I had a day job that was completely unrelated to writing. But at the same time, my day job writing, when I look back, informed my fiction writing because I was sort of exercising that muscle every day.
So the fact that you're a writer at your day job in some ways helped it. Now, you said you work in the news industry. Did you pull from the headlines and different stories that came across your desk as you were writing and things like that?
Yeah, not necessarily as my beat, but as a reader of news, as a consumer of news, I would pay attention to all the tidbits of news coming out of North Korea related to North Korea and that kind of thing.
You are talking to a news junkie. I don't look at one news source. I probably look at 30 in the average day, so.
Yep, that's a good news consumer because you shouldn't rely on a single source.
Well, thank you. I do try and present, when I'm working on my regular show, Jesse's POV, I try and present as wide a variety of news sources as I can, even going to the extreme sometimes and going with things that aren't readily available in this country, like Al Jazeera English.
Yep.
Which you can get some interesting stories off there, and I'll even go with Iran news once in a while, and I'll go out of my way to get that news source.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish more people would do that. One of the things that I think we've discovered over the last few years, as social media has penetrated our lives, is this silo effect where in social media you tend to surround yourself with people who think alike. And so when you get into some kind of Facebook argument about some political issue or something, a lot of people will block those people. But I think that's a pretty dangerous thing to do because you're basically isolating yourself within a community of people that only think like you. And social media tends to amplify that. I mean, of course, everybody likes to hang out with people that they like and think alike. But when it comes to consuming news, I think we should make some effort to read sources that we're not really familiar with.
Excellent point. Excellent point. All right. So what advice would you give to a writer who's toying with writing a novel or just started one, or they're somewhere along the process? You know, they're not obviously not published, but what advice would you give to that new writer?
So I think the best piece of advice that I could give is to carve out a chunk of your day, whether it's 30 minutes or however long that you can afford to do, and make that 30 minutes or an hour or whatever you can manage, make that a sacred time for you where you're not checking your Facebook feed, you're not taking phone calls, and the people around you, you're basically training them to stay out of that space during that time. And people will gradually learn that between the hours of 8 and 9, Paul is not reachable because this is his time. So carve out that time in your day and sit down and write. And the piece of advice that I heard actually not too long ago was from Ira Glass of This American Life. I don't know if you know that podcast.
No, I don't, but do tell.
Yep, it's an NPR program, and it was something that he said during a pledge drive. And he said that, when you're an artist and you first create work, you're not really satisfied with your results, and it feels really bad. But that's a good thing because that means that your taste is better than what you can achieve. And if you gradually work at improving your craft, then that gap between your taste and your own work begins to diminish. And at some point it catches up. So the fact that you feel like the work that you're creating right now, or at the beginning, that you don't feel it lives up to your standards is actually a good thing, because that means you have good standards.
That's an interesting piece of advice, that really is. And I like the idea of setting aside that block of time and saying, no, bug off. This is my time. And it is...
Yeah, I think that is, the old advice, if you're a writer, then you write. It may seem a bit glib, but fundamentally, that's what you have to do. You have to improve the craft. And you cannot improve the craft by just thinking about it. You actually have to do it. It's almost like a muscle. You have to train it.
So did you ever face writer's block or challenges and things like that?
I think I did encounter sort of minor episodes of writer's block, but I think it was more an issue of momentum. One of the things that sort of kept me from coming off the rails was to have an outline. And I did have an outline for this story, which was I think it was 15 to 20 pages long. It was an outline that pretty much hit some of the major plot points. So when I would get stuck, or what you might call writer's block, I would go back to the outline, and then I would realize that, okay, my story is at this point right now, but I need to get to the other point. How do I get from point A to point B in a narrative? And so I tried to solve that problem, and trying to solve it as a problem would get me out of the writer's block.
That is amazing. All right, Paul, I'm going to ask you to hang on with me while we take a brief commercial break.
Is debt beating you down? You need discipline. You need the Debt Ninja. If you've been caught in a financial trap and need to be set free, then you need the Debt Ninja. Want to stop those harassing collection calls, start saving thousands in interest and fees, and get out of debt fast? Then you need to call the Debt Ninja. The Debt Ninja will find the best companies across the country that will help you consolidate all your bills into one easy payment, reduce your payments by 30 to 50%, and get you out of debt fast. If you have unsecured debt of $10,000 or more, such as credit cards, loans, or medical bills, call the Debt Ninja for a free 15-minute consultation.
Call 800-826-1246. 800-826-1246. That's 800-826-1246. Call today.
The Debt Ninja.
In these uncertain economic times, you've got to do whatever you can to save money. One of our biggest expenses can be our cars, especially when unexpected repair bills hit. Not anymore. If you own a vehicle with less than 130,000 miles, is less than 12 years old, has a warranty about to expire, or even no warranty at all, you could stop paying for car repairs. Roadside assistance, towing, and rental coverage are all included. Don't wait for the next repair. Make one free call right now to see if you qualify. If your vehicle is less than 12 years old, has less than 130,000 miles, even if it's out of warranty, paying for car repairs can become a thing of the past. Call us right now and get your car protected before your next repair bill hits. Get protection and no more repair bills. Call 800-696-1030. Again, 800-696-1030. That's 800-696-1030. 800-696-1030.
All writers are prone to becoming so attached to our characters and stories that we struggle to see why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing to full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, shaping stories into masterpieces that can stand the test of time. Editing services are provided for all genres and all age categories. Services range from critiques of the short story through to the line edits of the full-length novel and copy editing for those preparing for publication. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites, as well as help with those book blurbs and promotional material. We won't abandon you to the masses. We want to celebrate with you in your successes. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services and prices, visit us at blackwolfeditorial.com.
All right. Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone out there for hanging with me through that commercial break. Gotta pay those bills or the coffee won't keep flowing. All right, Paul.
Yep.
So you finally finished your book. Now, while you mentioned this outline. That outline sounds huge to me. First of all, I will admit I do NaNoWriMo. Some years I make it, some years I don't. My outline, if I have one at all, usually fits on a 3x5 card, so I can't even imagine a 15 to 20 page outline.
It's actually not as long as it sounds. What I did was I followed sort of the traditional plot structure, the 3-act play structure. And I kind of outlined the story like that very roughly at first. And then, you need a climax, and then you need what they call the inciting incident, what kicks off the story at the very beginning. So I plugged in some of that stuff, and then I kind of fleshed it out. And as I was even writing the novel, sometimes I would go back into the outline, and then I would add some details. Because as you write, the plot will change. It cannot be just a one-way street. So I would go back into the outline, I would add some stuff, take other stuff out. And then at the end, it ended up being like a 15 to 20 page outline.
Wow. I will say I did try outlining for NaNoWriMo one year. I outlined this whole crazy novel set in one whole part of the world. And then when I sat down to start writing, my characters took me to another part of the world, and I never got back to the outline I made.
Yeah, well, sometimes you have to follow where the characters take you. That is, it is a classic, by the seat of your pants, what they call pantsers type of writing style.
Well, because I'm just doing it as a personal challenge for Nano, like I told you, I do kind of write, but I never share it. My writing stays tucked away on its own little external hard drive. Even my husband can't get to it. It's password protected.
Well, when you want to share it, then it'll be ready, right?
This stuff hasn't even been edited. I have had a friend of mine who is a writer look over it. Actually, a couple of friends. I'll share little bits with them once in a while. They'll cajole me and bug me long enough to, fine, you can read this short story now. Shoo. And they'll say, oh, this has got such a great premise for it. Yeah, whatever. It's not going any further.
Speaking of editing, I found that one of the dangers of writing on a computer is this urge to keep going back and making those words perfect. I found myself trying to go back and rewriting sentences, rewriting paragraphs, and that really kills your momentum. So for a huge chunk of the book, I actually ended up writing longhand on a legal pad so that it would force me to just get words down on a page.
Wow. You're talking to someone who I don't write stuff down. If I do, it's I may write down a grocery list. That's about the longest I write by hand. Yeah, I can't imagine writing most of a novel on a legal pad. So what software did you use when you were actually typing it?
So I was just using Microsoft Word, and so when I typed the longhand notes into Microsoft Word, that would be my quote-unquote first edit. That would be sort of a rough edit. And nothing really fancy, just a regular Microsoft Word.
Okay, because I've had several people trying to tell me about Scrivener, so it's...
I mean, I've heard good things about it, and I've heard that Scrivener is very good when you're trying to, when it's a very complicated structure. But on the other hand, I've heard people saying that it takes a little bit of effort to learn Scrivener. So, if you want to put in that effort, I'm sure it would be good. And if you're working on something that's very complex, I'm sure it's worth the investment. But at the same time, I feel that when you're writing, that any kind of distraction, whether it's learning new software or something, it's just a time suck, right? There are so many time sucks in your life that if you attend to everything that requires your attention, you're basically left with a thin slice of that pie that you promised yourself, that 1 hour or whatever it is in the morning. Oh, I'm going to check this email, I'm going to learn this new software. Oh, I'll just tweet this out. If you start paying attention to all of those things, then you're pretty much left with a tiny little sliver of time that you're actually writing. So I think it's important to figure out how much time you're willing to invest in new software.
Right, and I understand every piece of software has a learning curve. Trust me, I had to learn a whole bunch of new software when I started doing my radio shows. It was like, whoa, I was bombarded by new software. And
yeah.
I actually have played with Scrivener a bit. The only thing I like about it, my favorite feature, because I'm notorious for this, is the fact that it will automatically number the chapters for you.
Right, okay.
And then I can actually...
I have not used it personally myself, so I can't give you a thumbs up or thumbs down on it.
It'll automatically number the chapters, and then I can actually take my work and put it into a Kindle format and put it on my own personal Kindle and read through it or whatever. So.
Oh, right. Oh, one thing that I did do that I haven't heard anybody else mention this is when the work was relatively complete, I would put it into any number of apps that are available nowadays that will read text out loud in a synthesized voice.
Okay.
So you just plunk the text in there. You can be a chapter or something, and I would listen to it on my way to work because you can spot things that you normally wouldn't spot when you're reading the text versus when you're listening to the text.
Right. Your brain, when you're reading it, your brain will automatically fill in that missing word or that whatever it is.
Exactly. Yep. So that was kind of my first way of having a different kind of edit.
That is a good piece of advice. That really is. All right. So now that your book is out there and you're a published author, is there going to be another book?
There is. I hope. I am working on it right now, and it is a completely different genre. It's actually historical fiction.
Oh, what are you tackling, if you don't mind a sneak peek?
So, the story is about a samurai in feudal Japan who travels to Elizabethan England.
That could be interesting. Feudal Japan and Elizabethan England. Whoa.
So it's kind of the reverse of the James Clavell Shogun books.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. So I may not be a writer, but I am a voracious reader. And you'll pick up my Kindle and you'll go thriller, 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 nonfiction, fiction, historical fiction. There's a couple of romances in there. It's sci-fi fantasy. You know, I've got everything from nonfiction all the way through to Stephen King's It and Game of Thrones. So everything in between.
Yep. Yeah, I think having a sort of a varied appetite when it comes to reading is good.
I'll give any book, 3 to 5 chapters.
Right. You're actually more generous than the average reader then.
One of my biggest things I do as a quote reader, I occasionally have to go on long car drives, usually for personal, go visit family, because I have family in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Well, East Coast to Oklahoma, 20-hour drive, anybody? So
Wow.
I have an iPod that lives in my vehicle. Its sole source, its sole purpose in life is to live in my vehicle with audiobooks. So I will bring it in the day or two before, hook it up, load it up with a bunch of audiobooks. And I started this audio, and I'm not going to give out the title or anything. And it was like, where is this thing going? And had I actually been sitting flipping through that either on my Kindle or in my hand, I would have put the thing down.
Right.
But because it was just talking to me and I'm driving and I've got, I'm driving through this 20-hour drive, I literally got through the entire book.
Yeah.
Because it was a 16-hour audio book and a 20-hour drive.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks too when I'm driving or on the subway. That giving 3 to 5 chapters, that brings up a point of the publishing industry nowadays, is that there's this pressure to try and grab the reader basically within the first few pages. And it kind of makes you think about what kind of the books that we called classics would have survived in the current publishing environment. But it is kind of the trend nowadays to try and grab the reader right at the very beginning. And I understand why publishers want that, because the average reader's attention span is so much shorter than it used to be because we have so many more distractions.
You can probably thank social media, at least in part.
That's right.
So when you had your book finished and you started getting rejections from agents, did you ever think about going the self-published route or the small publish, or you're just like, I can get an agent, I can get one?
I never seriously considered self-publishing. I think part of that was I felt that the story at its core was pretty good, and I had friends that I trusted to give me their honest opinion, who have a pretty good BS detector, and they said that it was good. So if I had encountered more resistance in the process of finding an agent, I may have considered that, but I was very fortunate, as I said before, in that I found my agent pretty quickly in the grand scheme of things.
You've got the book out there. I hope it does well. You're starting a whole new book. What are your goals? Are you trying to become a full-time writer? Are you wanting to just keep it as a hobby? What are your goals and plans?
If I could become a full-time writer, that would be wonderful. But as you probably very well know, it's really hard to make a living as a full-time author unless you're quite well known or you're writing books at a really fast clip. There are authors who publish like a book every 6 months. These are parts of series, so the characters are all established, and what they're doing is just exploring a different aspect of the character or throwing the character into a different plot. But I personally am not that kind of a writer. Somebody asked me whether I would consider writing a sequel to Half-Life, and I hadn't really considered it. But, especially because if you live with the characters for so long, it's been over 10 years that I've lived with these characters, you kind of want to take a break from those characters. But if there is a big enough response, and if I feel that there's more left to say, then I could revisit those characters. But generally speaking, I'm writing things that I want to be self-contained. So it would be great if it did well and I could become a full-time writer. That would be sort of the dream scenario. But even if it doesn't, I told myself that I would be content just to be able to get that story out there, because that was one of really my initial goals, was to get the story out there, to sort of leave a written record of what life was like in the late 90s.
Speaking of, you went the traditional publishing route. How much control did you have once the book was sold to a publishing house with cover design and final processes? And what format is your book available in?
It's available in an ebook, and it's also available in paperback. And there'll be a small run of hardbacks. But I had quite a lot of control, actually, because I went with a small publisher by the name of Fiery Seas. And it's not a huge publisher, so I had a one-on-one relationship with the head of the company. So I had quite a bit of input in terms of cover art, in terms of the edits, and probably the most rigorous or the most extensive edits were actually happened when I had given my manuscript to my agent. And my agent gave me a lot of feedback that was very helpful. And I did some pretty significant restructuring of the novel based on my agent's suggestions. So that was where actually most of the edits took place. And once I got to the publisher, there were only a few rounds of minor edits.
Okay, so your agent actually helped you with a lot of the initial, not necessarily initial, but maybe third and fourth round edits kind of thing?
That's right, yeah.
It's great. I know a lot of agents. I've heard some agents will take the time to do that if they really like the book, and I've heard other agents won't be bothered. So I'm sure that's...
Yeah, I think, as I said, I kind of lucked out because I know Mark Gottlieb personally, and so I think he may have given me some extra attention as a personal friend. So again, I just felt really lucky when I visited that writers' conference, just to know. And I'm not naive about these kinds of things. When I knew that there were agents who they were just kind of the middleman versus, you have sort of the legendary agents who played like a very active role in shaping some very famous works that we know. So Mark was kind of sort of the happy medium. Like, he didn't get in my face about the edits. He made the suggestions, and he completely left it up to me as to whether I wanted to take the suggestions or not. But once somebody who's an avid reader and who's in the business gives you suggestions, I think it behooves you to really pay attention to those suggestions.
Like we've discussed, you were exceptionally lucky. You had a personal relationship with his agent. You got published that way. What advice would you give to the writer who doesn't know an agent, doesn't live in New York, where publishing is essentially based in the U.S.? What advice would you give to them to help make their manuscript stand out? Right.
That is always the tricky question. The publishing industry, the genres nowadays are in these kind of silos, whether it's young adult or whether it's techno spy thriller like your Tom Clancy type novels, or whether it's romance. I learned a new term when I went to the conference. There was this term called cozies, which are basically not the hardcore crime thrillers, but sort of cozy thrillers. I'd never heard that term before. And the thing is that if you're trying to write to satisfy what you believe that market will consume, then I think you're kind of ignoring an important part of writing, which is to express yourself and bring something new to the table. So rather than just following the standard format of a certain genre, I would urge people to bring something new to the table. As for finding an agent, going to one of these writers' conferences is a great way to get your work critiqued. They have roundtables where agents and publishers will sit down with you and read, whether it's 2 pages or 10 pages. Sometimes you can send your work in advance, knowing that they will meet you at the conference. So you can send it to them and have them critique it for you. That's a way to make contacts. When you go to these conferences, you run into published authors. You can ask them whether they like their agent, what kind of work that they deal with. If that's not available to you, you can look at any number of books that list agents. But the repeated advice that I hear from agents is that people who submit work to them, they're not reading the descriptions properly of how to submit the work, and they don't pay attention enough to what kinds of work that they will accept. For instance, if an agent deals exclusively in young adult, there's no point in sending that agent a work about a techno thriller, which they don't deal with. So paying attention to details like that, I think, are really important.
Okay, that is a bit of advice. I've always heard, like I said, I'm kind of on the fringe of the whole writing community. I have friends that are writers. One of them always stresses, make sure your manuscript is properly formatted according to industry standards. And another one's always going, make sure you catch the reader's attention on page 1 and don't let them go.
Right.
So paying attention to what the agent will accept and making sure for lack of a term, do your research.
Yes, I think you have to look at it from the agent standpoint. The agent, for you, this is your work and you're very attached to it. And sometimes it's puzzling why agents are not latching onto it immediately. But you have to look at it from the agent standpoint. From the agent standpoint, that agent is getting multiple submissions every day. So you have to do something to stand out from the pile. And when you make a rookie mistake, like formatting it incorrectly or sending a wrong type of genre to an agent, the easiest thing for the agent to do is to toss it into the slush pile or toss it into a pile that is probably not going to get his or her attention. So you have to eliminate every excuse you can think of for this agent not to read your work. You have to make it as easy as you can for that person to say, okay, it looks like it's professionally done. I'll give it a read. I'll give it at least multiple pages.
I think that's good advice. You went with a smaller press. Are they doing anything to help you promote or publicize your book, or has that kind of been left up to you? And what about building a writer's platform, social media, Facebook, Twitter, website, all that? When did you start doing that, and how active are you in those realms?
So my publisher being a relatively smaller publisher, it's sort of a shared responsibility between myself and my publisher to promote the book. My publisher has scheduled a pretty extensive blog tour where I do guest blogs or I do Q&As with the blog authors to promote the book. And I wouldn't necessarily say that going to a larger publisher will get you more publicity. They may have more of a publicity machine in place, but the thing you have to understand about the larger publishers is that they only activate the full force of that publicity machine for books that they feel are going to sell gangbusters. Say, for instance, it's some famous person writing a book. They're not necessarily going to activate the full power of their publicity machine for a debut author that they're not quite sure how well they're going to do. As a debut author, you're gonna have to take on a lot of those responsibilities yourself, whether it's a smaller publisher or a larger publisher. So I've done things like after it got accepted by my publisher, Fiery Seas, I had constant communication with my publisher, and they said I should create an author website, which I did. I was going to try to do it myself, and then I realized this is part of that equation of distractions in your life. I realized that I could do it if I really studied hard, but that I wasn't willing to commit the time that it took to make a website look really good. So I contacted some authors that I knew. I asked them who their web designer was. I looked at, I'd seen some of their websites. I liked certain ones. And that's how I found a web designer. So I hired the web designer to create the website. Lately, I've been using Facebook to promote the book. I have a separate Facebook author page, Paul H.B. Shin. And so I've been keeping people updated on Facebook. Twitter can be a little bit of a interesting platform because from everything that people are telling me, Twitter tends to be a bit of an echo chamber. So people may talk about something, any topic, doesn't have to be a certain book, but it tends not to lead to sales, is what I'm told. That's one of the peculiarities of Twitter. So I'm trying to hit all these different methods of trying to expose the book to readers that may not be aware of it. And I also hired a PR person to help me with some other radio appearances in other parts of the country.
Awesome. Well, as you know, we're online, so we're available all over the country.
That's right. It's the wave of the future. It's actually being online nowadays, or being in a podcast form, gives the program what they call the long tail, right? You don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time to listen to the show. You can listen to it whenever you want.
Right, and this will actually eventually make its way over to the iTunes podcast series, and it'll be available for on-demand replay and download. And like as I told you before we started the actual interview, I will send you a link which will enable you to make a widget so you can actually place this interview on your own website, or have your website designer do it, or whatever, depending on the complexity and how much you choose to update your own site. So do you blog? I've heard a lot of writers blog.
So I'm beginning to blog. The thing about blogs is that I think you kind of have to offer something. You have to offer content that the readers find useful. I plan to do a little bit more blogging of even speaking to other authors, different parts of the craft and the business of publishing, and some North Korean related stuff.
Well, I have a feeling the North Korean related stuff won't be hard for you to find, given your day job.
That's right. I mean, every day you hear something. So even though I began this novel more than 10 years ago, it is turning out to be quite timely, because you may have heard there was a recent defection of a high-ranking North Korean diplomat in London. I think he may have been the UK ambassador or something like that. And so there are defections in my story as well, because at the time when North Korea was having this famine, it was leading to some huge social upheaval in North Korea, which was prompting a number of very high-profile defections, including the guy who was the mastermind behind the North Korean ideology of 주체, which means self-reliance. And he defected. And there was a British newspaper that likened it to Thomas Jefferson defecting to the British. I mean, that's how significant that defection was. It was a massive event at the time, and he makes a brief appearance in the novel as well.
Wow, that's awesome. I've read the term juche. I believe that's how you pronounce it, juche.
Juche, yep.
I've actually never been quite sure how to pronounce it, so thank you. And literally, while you were talking, I picked up my stack of news articles, because when I'm preparing for my regular show, I print out anywhere from 10 to 25 articles, knowing I'm not going to get to all of them. And I'm holding in my hand another, the headline says, North Korea diplomat defected from Vladivostok.
Right.
So
it is, this is kind of the heart of the novel. When you're exposed to the Western world, it's really hard to keep living that lie, because you know what the rest of the world is doing. And then you look at your own country and realize how insular it is, the kind of propaganda that's going on. So that's at the core of what I wanted to get to, is this character, Han Chol-soo, that's the main character, who has to live this lie, and he's also been living a lie personally because his relationship with his wife falls apart. And so all these things where people who are based overseas, when they defect, there is a reason that they do that. And it's not about economics. It's not necessarily about, oh, I just want to drive a nice car or something like that. When you decide to turn your back on your country, that is treason, right? So these guys are making a conscious decision to commit an act of treason, and for them to walk over that threshold is a massive decision.
I cannot imagine turning my back on my country. I mean, and you're talking to someone who is a military spouse. I've been exposed to other countries and other cultures, and I'm sitting here going, I could never do it. And
right.
That may be because I'm blessed to have been born where I've been born and live in this country. It may be for any number of reasons, but I mean, right next to that story with the North Korean diplomat, I also have another quirky story I picked up online. I'm just going to mention it to you real quick, probably for a good chuckle. Now streaming Internet Protocol TV service arrives in North Korea. So, like I said, I figured that would get a chuckle out of you. They now have an intranet, not internet. They don't want you connecting to the big wide world. But
they do not.
But their own internal intranet is now
Well, there was
offering
that theory that, there was some chatter. Remember, I think it was last year when the movie The Interview came out, that comedy with Seth Rogen and James Falco, about these two guys, sort of hapless guys, going to interview Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un in North Korea. The Sony emails got hacked, and there was some chatter that the origin of that hack was based in China. So there have been reports that North Korea has a very active cyber attack brigade, and their base of operation may be in some private hotel-type location in China. So they definitely don't want their own country connecting to the World Wide Web, but at the same time, there's part of them that doesn't want to get left behind, so they develop it within their country. But the whole power of the internet comes from interconnectedness, so it's a paradox. The whole country has so many paradoxes.
It does. I mean, you see stories about their own people starving, and they've just cut rations again for their soldiers, and then they go launching missiles into the ocean, and you're going, guys, what about feeding your people?
Right.
So, and it definitely has a paradox.
Yes.
So, all right. Is there any topic I didn't hit that you wanted to cover?
No, I think that's it. I think you pretty much covered everything. Especially in terms of the advice for aspiring writers, I think that was a topic that I was happy to talk about, because I had such a hard time in my own life just getting this together. And I have a feeling that many writers out there who are struggling to complete their work will probably, it will resonate with them.
Well, like I do with every author at the end of a coffee shop interview, and actually all my guests on my regular show as well, but particularly coffee shop, why don't you give out all your social media contacts and tell us where they can purchase your book, at least online?
Yep, it is available on all the online bookstores, including Amazon. You can just do a search for Half-Life and my name, Paul Shin. And my website is paulhbshin, that's one word, paulhbshin.com. And you can find me on Facebook and on my author page at paulhbshin.com. Paul H.B. Shin on Facebook.
Okay, and do you have a Twitter handle you'd like to add to that?
Yep, Twitter handle is at Paul H.B. Shin.
All right. I will also, for all of you listening, if you look at the description, the link to Paul's website will be in the description. So you'll be able to connect with him, and I'll probably throw his Twitter handle in there. Maybe his Facebook page if I get a chance to grab it. But I'm sure his website has links to everything.
Yes, it does.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me in the coffee shop.
Thanks so much, Jesse. This has been fun. I really appreciate it.
Oh, not a problem.
You take care.